could also probably give you more information on his bio and stuff. So Eric, who are you?
Oh, thanks for having me on. So I do board game reviews, board game photography. I actually just hit my 5-year cycle complete yesterday. So just tipped over the line for 5 years. So that's been fun. When I'm not doing that, as I said, reviews, photography, writing, and I serve on the committee for the American Tabletop Awards. So that's also fun.
Okay. So
I find that in quarantine, a lot of like video calls, I have to get more like shoulder animated. Because it used to be I could like do things with like more hand stuff. My hands are frequently out of frame, so now it's just a lot more like shoulder rolls.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're trying, then I guess I can try too, because like my hands are also not
Right? It's like I talk a lot with my hands, so I'm just like, oh, but they're out of frame. So shoulder gestures. Everyone's gonna be doing it in like 3 years.
Yeah, it's gonna be weird, like what will carry over from COVID, like all these things, like one thing I hope that we never do again is handshakes, and we just always touch elbows and like don't get sick anymore.
I'll probably miss handshakes a little bit, but like not enough to keep doing them. I'll just be like, ah, yes, handshakes, a forgotten relic of a bygone age.
So, let's get to it. Could you tell us a little bit about your review process?
Yeah. So, generally speaking, my review process is, I think, well, I was going to say fairly straightforward, but I've also been doing the exact same thing for 5 years. So, of course, it's straightforward to me. I've just deeply internalized it. Generally speaking, the game will arrive in some way. Either I'll buy it, the publisher buys it, depending on what game I'm reviewing. I still pick up a fair number of Kickstarters every now and then. I just backed Railroad Inc., the new one, just because I really like that game. But so I'll usually try to play it anywhere between like 3 and up times. Sometimes I can get a good gist of it after a couple plays. Sometimes I'll get a gist of it after like 10 plays. If it's a quick enough game, so there are a lot of games, that are just sort of like The Crew, right? You can just bust out a round in like 5 minutes. That I can probably get in like 10 or more plays of before I get a review of. Other games like Millennium Blades, where it takes me an hour to set up and explain the rules and then 2 hours to play the game, it will take me many months or years to get a review out just because I have to actually make the time for it and then play it. So once I've gotten enough plays in, I'll usually, and these two things happen kind of synchronously. So I will work on either the photography or the actual text of the review. It used to be I would always write first and then take photos. Lately, I found that it's helpful to have the photos in hand to inform some of the like writing that I'm doing. It depends a little bit on the game. But once I've gotten those two things together, I'll do the editing for the photos, sort of push them together, and then I'll publish the review usually around midnight on the Monday that I feel like publishing them. After the review is out, I do a little bit of promotion. So I have a few different social channels: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, some self-promotion channels in various Slacks that I'm a member of, and I'll send out the relevant stuff to those places. And that usually is my contribution for it. I also have a BGG blog that I post to, although I've been getting sloppier about that in quarantine. So I definitely have not posted this week's reviews there yet, and we are almost out of this week. So I'll probably do that after this. But that's a rough guideline of how I get through the like game process.
So, you brought up that some of the games take longer. What's the longest it's taken you to do a review that you actually like wanted to do?
I mean, like technically, I haven't reviewed Spirit Island, and that's still on my like, I'm gonna get to that one list. Like every so often, I like look at it on the shelf, and I'm like, is today the day that I like sit down and get like all the photography done for Spirit Island? And I'm like, no, it is not. But eventually, that day is going to come. It's only been maybe like 2 or 3 years since I bought it, so it's my little green light on the dock. Like I like stand outside on the lake in the middle of the night and I look out and I like sort of reach towards my review of Spirit Island. I'm not ever going to get there, but the idea that I one day could get there is driving both me and I guess F. Scott Fitzgerald's rough concept of the American dream. I like read that book. It's fine.
Um, I could see Spirit Island because like it's a fun game and all, but like it has so many parts and stuff, and you do like such elaborate photos
I
that
also
would
don't
take
think
a
I've
while.
ever actually made it past the beginner variant. Like people are always like, "Oh yeah, I was playing against England at a 10." And I was like, "What's England?" They're like, "Oh, it's an adversary." I'm like, "What's an adversary?" And they're like, "Have you not played with adversaries?" And I'm like, "Oh, I like the game just fine already." Anyway, we could talk about Spirit Island for an hour, but yeah, no.
Yeah. So what is something that you really appreciate in a game?
Um, I think I appreciate a lot about like, or one thing that I usually go for is the theme compelling? So if the theme is compelling, then hopefully the art is also similarly compelling. Like I think of theme as a bit of a combination of the game's aesthetics, the game's presentation, and what the game is fundamentally about. I would say that art and theme, you can have a good theme with bad art, but I think in order to have a great theme, you need to also have great art. You know what I mean? You need to have art that plays into the theme in some way. And that doesn't necessarily have to be, like someone has hand painted every scene, right? There are a lot of people who really like Food Chain Magnate. And I would say Food Chain Magnate is on the like sparser side artistically, but the stuff that it chooses to do, it does a very good job with. Ultimately, I haven't played it. I've mostly just seen like the box and a few photos, and I'm like, oh, that's nice. But for me, that's usually what stands out a bit when I'm like looking at games, and that's also what has motivated a lot of my purchases. Like one of my favorite games, the Shipwreck Arcana, I bought purely on the art. I didn't even actually look at the gameplay at all. I was like, the art plus I think it might have been like $12 on Kickstarter, and I was like, I once went to go see Ghost Rider in theaters. I have spent more than $12 on something that I thought was a worse use of my time. So just drop the money for it. Love the game. Still think it's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, Shipwreck Arcana is like one of my favorite co-op games, but that's mostly because I don't like co-op.
Oh, that and The Crew are probably my like two favorite cooperatives right now.
Mm.
And I have a soft spot for Burgle Bros, but like Burgle Bros was like one of the like first really big cooperative games I played that in pandemic.
So, what game made you want to become a reviewer? Was it Burgle Bros?
I wouldn't say that anyone in particular motivated that decision. It was mostly that I was it's actually a funny story. I had a lot of free time in 2015, as I assume many of us did, simpler time. Um, and I was talking to a friend basically. I was like, I am bored and at home. What should I do? Because I had just like finished up grad school, like job stuff hadn't really ramped up yet, et cetera, et cetera. And my friend was at the time writing a food blog about Final Fantasy 14, in which she like tried to cook every recipe in real life that you would cook in the game.
Okay.
It's like a fascinating endeavor. But she was like, "Well, have you thought about writing?" And I was like, "Well, what would I write about?" She's like, "What do you do for fun?" And I was like, "I guess I play board games." She's like, "You can write about board games." I'm like, I could give it a whirl. So I tried it, started enjoying it, kept doing it, and now here we are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you went to board games instead of like writing the food about food in some game or I
I
mean,
probably
well
been a
that
better cook.
yeah. I mean, it makes me interested what they make in Final Fantasy 14 because like I've
Apparently, a
seen what
lot of food.
um, so what are some good things that a publisher can do to help the review process?
So I think that the biggest problem that pops up for me and for a number of people that I know who work with publishers on like the reviewing and media side is communication, right? So like clear lines of communication, clear expectations, and a setup that doesn't rely on assumptions. So the mistake that I make pretty frequently, and this is mostly speaking of my own experience, is that I have a list of things that I expect on my site. Like I'm like, if you reach out to me for a review, I assume that you have already read this and that you are okay with these terms as written. Not everyone has. That assumption is mostly out of ease for me, so that way I don't have to routinely explain the same level of my process every time, and I have a place that I can direct people to. So that's what'sericplaying.com/contact. Since not everyone reads that, it means that we occasionally have mismatches on things. So, for instance, like a publisher may not send the final copy of a game that I previewed for Kickstarter. It may just never arrive, which is like kind of a bummer, especially if I had to send the other package back. But like, what can you do? It's not the biggest deal in the world. Or things like, oh well, we really want to see content published on Sundays. And like, but I only publish content on Mondays. Now we've got a mismatch, right? Like if they have needs or desires, communicating them up front makes it easy for us to say, okay, this is a thing that I can meet, this is a thing I can compromise on, and this is something that I have to stick to my guns with. And similarly, I assume publishers have requirements and needs. There are publishers who, at least they've been a lot more flexible since the pandemic, but we'll say like if you receive a game from us, we would like a review within 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Currently, that timetable is a non-starter for me. I very frequently, unless something very lucky happens, I cannot usually get a review done within 6 weeks. So I usually ask for an 8-week time frame, or else we start talking about rush fees and schedule and prioritization. Because if I'm trying to get a game played for a Kickstarter launch within 8 weeks, it usually means that I'm bumping something else that's also on my schedule down in priority. And there is something to the idea that shifting priorities should involve some sort of like compensation or movement to make sure that things get placed where they need to get placed.
Mm-hmm.
And being upfront about those is, I think, good.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Do you prefer like email or like what sort of?
I always prefer email because I was talking to a coworker about this and about the idea of like cognitive overload happening right now. Like everyone is just dealing with and processing so much that things are starting to slip and get forgotten. And like, I think that's just the reality of being in both a like pandemic, a tumultuous political climate, a tumultuous like race climate in the United States. Like a lot's going on right now. So having things that you can refer back to like email is always better than say like a Facebook message or like a phone call or something. You need something that has a like written document of like, this is the relationship that we are having moving forward, and these are the expectations we have of each other.
Do you actually have phone calls with publishers?
No, thank the Lord.
Oh, that would be terrible.
My dad and I have a very like lengthy debate about this. He's like, kids your age don't like using the phone. I was like, yeah, no, that's right. We don't actually have a debate about it. Like the factual nature of it is like very straightforward. I think it's more that there's the moral debate of it where he thinks that's a bad thing, and I think that's fine. I'm like, yeah. Oh yeah, I hate being on the phone.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm on the same boat. It's like if I'm on the phone, that means no one's writing it down. I can't search for it anywhere. Therefore, it's going to get forgotten, and then somebody's going to get angry, and it's going to be the other person because I always forget.
Oh yeah, no, I'm like I have managed to process enough to both keep my job together and like keep my life together. The board game thing, I need everything emailed to me. Otherwise, I'm going to be like, someone will be like, yeah, so we sent you a copy of the game. I'm like, did you? Do I know you? Like, have we met before? Like, no, I live and die by my like calendar or my email right now.
I mean, so my calendar, I live by it so much that it like the Alexa synchronization stopped, and I just stopped going to meetings. They just stopped happening because no one like binged and said a meeting was starting in 10 minutes. And
yep.
So.
Yeah, I have my calendar duplicated on my phone, and that's what keeps me organized.
Mm-hmm. So with all the things with reviewing Kickstarters, like where they have the deadline and the very specific date, and sometimes they're not like the final thing, why even review Kickstarter games?
Sense of masochism? Actually, let's see here. I think that there is something to the idea. So I think that like standard publishing processes have gotten a fair bit more like diverse and more like open to new styles and to new experimental things, especially in recent years. Even more so as publishers themselves start experimenting with Kickstarter to fund things that are like, it's like AEG has like a very standard publishing line, but like Edge of Darkness is a fairly ambitious title from them just because it does way more than a small child, and I think is larger than a small child. Depends on the child, I guess. But like that is something that you would probably see them push through Kickstarter because it's more experimental, it's more risky. It's not something that they would necessarily be able to make the gamble on from like a standard publishing line. But I find that the best parts of Kickstarter, now the worst parts, that's an entirely different, we can have a discussion about that for days, weeks, years. But the best parts of Kickstarter when people are going after like things that are new, experimental, and kind of interesting, and then like cutting edge. I will say that I'm not quite as keen on Kickstarters that are just here is an upgraded, bedazzled version of the game. I personally like the justification of this needs to exist and needs Kickstarter to exist. And like again, we could get into it. This is mostly just my opinion. This doesn't reflect the opinions of my employer or whatever. I think I have to say that for some reason now. But I tend to review Kickstarter games either because I have a standing relationship with the publisher. So there are a lot of publishers. I can imagine that you could name at least two off the top of your head, Carla, that tend to use Kickstarter a fair bit for their releases. And so we have a standing relationship. And so I tend to do a fair bit of reviews for publishers that are in that category. I also like the idea that, and I don't think this is an entirely fair statement, but there is something to the democratization of Kickstarter that allows like smaller entities to get their game made. And as a fairly small entity in the reviewing space, I feel like a rising tide lifts all boats of giving some space and some time to creators so that we can like uplift new people who are coming in or new game ideas or like new interesting stuff. I think is a good use of my time as a reviewer, right? Rather than just covering the like nth Asmodee game, although that is also a perfectly fun thing to do. And there are considerations that need to happen there, right? From like the growth standpoint, from like the like hype standpoint, like is like what generates the most views for content, right? So a picture of, let's say, Fort, the new on Instagram, will probably generate maybe like 2 to 4 times as many likes as an equivalent picture of a game that may have less like critical mass around it. And there are considerations you take on that from like the influencer side. From the media side, I think that that's not super relevant to what I think of as like a reviewer. But if I am thinking about it as on more of the influencer side, I do like take that sort of stuff into consideration. That was kind of a rambly answer, but I think at some point I hit your point, and then it kind of moved back away from me.
I mean, I think the rambling answers tell us the most about, all the things you know. So David had a question. Eric, I learned about you and your reviews from Twitter. What platforms have you had the most success with promoting your brand and reaching a wide audience?
So, sorry. I really like Twitter because I feel like Twitter is a nice, like, I just enjoy screaming my thoughts into the void in an abstract sense. And I think Twitter is a very good platform for that. I find Instagram to be a lot less conversational. Instagram is more like someone drives by you and throws a photo album at you and that sort of hits you in the head. And you're like, oh, but this is nice. Like someone screams, like, look at this food that I ate. And you're like, it's nice looking food. And that's sort of the like nature of the conversation that you have there. I've had a few good conversations on Instagram, but I feel like it's not as much of a conversational medium. And I think that the user experience, the platform reflects that a fair bit, right? Like on Twitter, the conversation is front and center. On Instagram, the conversation is a little bit more like hidden. You can go out of your way to find comments or reply to comments, but even the threading of it isn't quite, I think, precise enough to really like work with the conversation. Reddit, it's hit and miss. Like I had a lot of success with Reddit early. I sort of transitioned off Reddit as a platform as it became more complicated. I know we've like there's been drama on the board game Reddit in the past. I think it is a community that you need to participate in at the level and style of the participation that community wants in order to have that community be something that's successful for you. And for many people, that's what they want to do, and that's perfectly fine. It's not something that I particularly it's not something that works with the style of like availability that I currently have. I think is that I would have to invest a lot more time to really make a place for myself on Reddit that didn't feel like I was just driving through the living room of a child's birthday party and then being like, excuse me, please check out my brand. And I think that's just a different style of interaction that I currently have the bandwidth for. Other than that, like Facebook exists, and that's basically all I have to say about it. Like, it's fine if you have a dedicated group. If you're a page, especially with some of the recent changes they made to how like pages show up in people's feeds, it doesn't really do anything. And I don't really want to start a like what's Eric playing Facebook group. I don't really know what I would say there beyond just like someone coming up and being like, "Oh, Man on the Mountain, what do you think of this game?" And I'd be like, "It's fine, I guess." And I kind of already have Twitter for that, so I don't think it adds anything that I feel like I'm missing. And at some level, I mostly just want to interact with people. So I think Twitter as a high interaction medium is pretty good. It's obviously got a bunch of problems, which again is the subject of multiple books, conversations, and year-long like roundtable discussions. But you know, I find that for what we have available, it's probably the one that I enjoy using the most.
Yeah, I would second that. Like, I love Twitter. The other ones are meh. I've tried and I just haven't ever stuck with them because like Twitter has that conversation and like you can actually like make friends that last on Twitter.
Hmm.
So the other ones I haven't found the same community.
Yeah, I have good interactions with Instagram, but a lot of the like Instagram interactions I have are with people that are already fairly like photography like leaning. So those are people that I tend to interact with the most on Instagram.
So what's something you've always wanted to tell publishers?
Uh, hmm, hmm. I had something for this, but I think that I will echo something that someone said to me rather than something that I'm thinking of, just because my mind just blanked a little bit. But I was talking to another creator, and they were expressing some frustration at like they want their relationship with publishers to be a little bit more bi-directional. So in the same sense that they are creating content for publishers, they would like to make sure that publishers are sharing content more regularly. So this is actually something I think not to like put Carla on the spot, but I think Carla has done really well with as a publisher is that especially in the lead up to a lot of Kickstarter campaigns and during Kickstarter campaigns, she'll regularly resurface review content that's been made by other media folks, which helps her by getting more people to look at content about something that she's putting on Kickstarter, but also helps the reviewers by people who are saying, "Oh, I was already interested in this game, but let's see what this person has to say about it," and gives them opportunities to see a wide range of opinions on something. And I think there are a few other places that do a fairly good job with that as well. I know Renegade has a fairly regular content cycle for games as well, and I think that the person I was talking to, their frustration was that that isn't something that necessarily all publishers prioritize. And they were feeling at that time like they were basically, going through the trouble of making this review content and saying, "Hello, publisher. Like this has been made for the game that you sent me," and the publisher said, "Fantastic. I love it. Into the garbage." And like, I understand from a publisher's perspective that like I do not like every game that I play, and I do not really expect a publisher to be like, "All right, this is our big flagship release. Eric said that he thought it could have been done better and was in fact not particularly good, and he gave it a 4 out of 10." Now, you might be saying, "Should I buy this 4 out of 10 game?" And we, people who make money off of this game release, would say, "Yes, you should." And so there's the complicated nature of like sharing negative review content is not something that I would really be surprised if a publisher was doing regularly. If they do it, like more power to them. Like I guess you could spin it. No news is all news is good news, maybe, but especially for things that I think a lot of like I am surprised when I see like a glowing review from somebody that the publisher has just sort of left in the ether that happens. And I have seen it happen a few times, especially with like some of the content that I follow. And I'm just like, oh, well, okay, that's how it goes sometimes. It's also the nature of like what is a good review, and that itself is again subject to many long discussions, year-long roundtables, and books and novels. Maybe a feature-length film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, well, I can definitely see it from both sides. Like I do try to like like definitely retweet. Like that's so easy. Is just to click a button, but like bringing the content back, it's always like how often and when and like if I have all these links and stuff and if I do them like 3 times a day, will my audience just hate me? So well, should I do it once a day or I don't
Mhm.
know. Figuring out a
Yeah,
cadence is hard.
right. And there's like diminishing returns for that as well, right? Like if I were if I were saying, yes, here is a review that I posted 3 years ago about a game. Like there is the ebb and flow of how much people care about a game, right? And if I'm again as a like media person that doesn't really have a like if I were writing board game reviews for the New York Times, I wouldn't have to work on growing my own brand because I would already have a like strong established brand there. But since I'm writing them for myself, I also have to like think about not just reviewing and like content creation, but I also think about brand management, influencing, and like growth. And so I'm not going to necessarily say every week or every day I'm going to like automate a system that tweets out one of my previous reviews because at a certain point it overwhelms my followers with like content that's not necessarily for them, and then they start to gravitate away from it. There's definitely a like, I mean, I imagine this is why this is social media and social media marketing are many people's actual full-time jobs because it is not something that you can just clown your way through. You can do fine clowning your way through it, but if you really want to like take it to the next level, you have to really be invested in it. I don't think that I am, frankly, but I respect other people who are.
Yeah, it's hard. Oh, I recently got a social media manager, and I'm really excited because like I actually like when they post. Like I get excited. Like they posted something about kittens, in my games, and I was like, whoa, I could do that. But yeah, social
Oh yeah, I
media.
think I saw that.
Yeah, that was Marty. But anyway, so like you do a lot of reviews. Well, you used to like an intense amount that I thought you were like you didn't sleep ever. Um,
Weeps.
but you do like at least one review, and typically more than that every Monday. So like, do you have any processes or tools that you use to like stay on top and actually
Mhm.
make that happen?
Yeah, so I built out a spreadsheet for myself, and the spreadsheet is essentially a tracker. It tracks all the games that I've received, and it basically tells me what their play status is, and what their review status is. Most of them are currently sitting at not enough plays because playing games is currently my major bottleneck. Just the reality of being in a pandemic. But once I have enough plays, I'll usually shift them to a templatized version of my review. So my reviews have fairly major headers: setup, gameplay, player count differences, pros, misses, and cons, or actually strategy, pros, misses, and cons, and then overall. And so I have a template that exists with that formatting already put in place. So I'll add the template, move it to template only. Sometimes if I'm just like hanging around watching TV or something, I'll like start the review and that upgrades it to like some sections written, then I have most sections written, then I have complete and finally published. Similarly, a recent ad in like the last 2 years, I added another column for the photography status because now that I don't just do writing the photography, I actually need to like process the way the photos are. So I have a few games that are in pictures edited, but then the review isn't written yet. So like Sonora, actually, I can just look it up right now. But the Sonora is currently mostly written, but I do have the photos done and already uploaded. So that's good. And that'll be launching. When is it launching? Okay, that was right. Yeah, I said the 20th. So little fun bonus for you, giving you a sneak peek of what I'm doing in 2 weeks. Other things that I have in there are like where I've posted the content. So just keep track of like, did I put it up on BGG yet? That has really fallen into disrepair because I just don't pay that much attention to it. And I keep track of things like the score that I gave the game. A really interesting thing is so I don't think I've ever publicly copied this, but I keep track of the average score of the games that I've reviewed and how the like average has changed over time. And I have like a little chart for it just to, really feed into the like, am I getting progressively like kinder to games? Am I getting progressively less kind? And actually hasn't varied that much significantly in the last like 3 years or so, which I'm pretty pleased about. So I feel like that's it. I will not say the average number for a variety of reasons because numbers, but I definitely think that the number that is my average number is roughly how I feel about games in general, which is that there are many good games. There are not necessarily as many great games, and I'm trying to play more great games, but I'm also happy playing good games. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's my own personal opinion on it, but keeping all that stuff tracked along with the publishing date and a note as to whether or not I received the game from the publisher or whether I bought it myself has been helping me keep my calendar pretty steady.
That's really surprising to me that your like average score hasn't changed at all, because like
I'm also surprised by that.
like as I play more games, I hate more games. Like I used to be like really happy with games like 4 or 5 years ago, and like now I more than likely like I'll play a game and I'll be like, oh, okay, I never need to play this game again ever. Whereas in the past I was like perfectly happy to play Catan, 300
Mhm.
times or something.
Sure.
Do you think that there's like any other reason for that? Like maybe like you're more picky with the games you review, or
I think that's definitely true, but I think the idea of selection bias like permeates reviewing even from the start, right? So an example I gave on a different chat was that let's say you today are going to start becoming a board game reviewer. What games do you review? Well, you think to yourself, I will review all the games that I already own because I already own them. Now, the follow-up question to that is, why did you buy the games that you currently have in your collection? Arguably because you enjoy them, right? So you'll actually, I would make the argument that for reviewers that provide scores in the reviews, you'll probably see a larger bump in their average score towards the beginning of their review process because they are reviewing games to their own collection, and those are ostensibly games that they already like. Because otherwise, why would they be in your collection? Now, as you shift, right, then you start having this like probably a dip in the middle where a reviewer is taking as many games as they can to sort of build up their brand. Basically, like, oh, I want to try new stuff. I want to see what fits. I play a game, and I'm like, oh, this isn't really for me. And then finally, it will probably do exactly what you mentioned, which is it'll start leveling out as they become pickier about the games that they review. Because the problem, again, I mentioned this elsewhere, is that like, for like, if you are the late Roger Ebert, right, you can go watch a movie. You're sitting in the theater watching Sonic the Hedgehog and being like, yes, this is the height of cinema. Um, and if you try to go to your friends and you say, hey, do you want to come watch Sonic the Hedgehog with me? They're going to be like, no, that's a blight. And they'd be wrong. But you can still go watch Sonic the Hedgehog 3 more times by yourself to really get a sense of like Jim Carrey's overall intent over the arc of the movie and whether or not Sonic's gradual journey to grow into a hero is a reflection on like the larger American consciousness and how it relates to our relationship with both the natural and the technological at the time, right? Now, if you're thinking about it from like a board game reviewer standpoint, if I come over and I say, "Hey, you want to play this? You want to play this game I don't like?" Well, my friends have finite time, so like, why would they do that? They're going to be like, and they have been aptly like, "No, we would prefer to play something that you do like," and that's fair. So it is much harder to play games to get them to a reviewable state if you don't like them. It's just difficult.
I mean that all makes a lot of sense.
I agree.
Um,
But yeah, I think that is probably a rough like my like rough working theory for why that happens that way. Because to be fair, like I would say that this is also that like if I were to speculate, your eye as a designer is probably more critical for like gaps in mechanics that cause bumps in the road. Whereas I'm thinking when I play more about the overall experience of playing the game, and part of that is that sometimes I just enjoy the like narrative the story is trying to or the game is trying to construct in and of itself. And I'm like, I think the game did a good job in these places. I think these things weren't great, but they aren't necessarily deal breakers for me. But I imagine that when you play a game, you're looking through and you're saying, oh, I can already see how I would improve this or make this better. And I kind of wish that it tilted more towards the style of game that I like to make or the style of game that I'm currently working on. Is that a fair?
yeah, definitely. Like it's usually games that I'm like not happy with that like motivate me enough to go like design a game and play
Right.
test it and do
Exactly.
like the better version of it, or the
Mhm.
better for Carla version of it.
Right.
Because what is a good game? Who
Exactly.
knows?
No one knows. But I think that's the difference between how we approach games as well, right? I think that's an interesting perspective, and it's a valuable one as well because that you bring that perspective into your design. And I think about it as more of like, this game had some problems that didn't really sit well for me, but I could see how someone else who really likes action programming could be really into these things.
So, do you have any tricks on staying motivated? Because you've been motivated to review games for 5 years.
I usually am motivated by spite, but in a larger sense, But I think that it's consistency, honestly. So like scheduling consistency really helps a lot. So like the thing that I worry about is burnout, and I think that happens for a lot of creators as well. Um, there is some difficulty to like I think producing content every day. There's some idea of too much content. Even for me, like 4 to 5 reviews a week at like my peak was really more a function of the fact that I had the ability to play a lot of games and I was reviewing fairly short games. And now that I don't have the ability to play as many games, I've compensated by lowering my review cadence, and that's been fine. It's more just responding to circumstances. If I had instead forced myself to keep reviewing 4 games a week out of some like misguided notion of I need to do this for some external reason, I would have burnt out. Like I know that fundamentally because there have been weeks that it's been very hard to even hit 2, but I thankfully have enough. I have an emergency backlog in addition to my like normal backlog of reviews that I've already written. That push comes to shove, I can be like, all right, we're just going to push this one out. And we're going to take a week for ourselves. And so I think that that also helps a lot. The idea of like making content while the sun shines is that you can get a backlog of content that you don't necessarily need to publish, but you should always have at least like a few weeks to a month's worth of content backlogged, so that way you can, if needed, push that out so you can take a break.
Oh, that's super great. Like I wish I could get up to that point of having like all the content and just, if you get sick or something, then
Mm-hmm.
then you're fine.
Oh yeah, I've
Um,
gotten sick. I've gotten sick. I've like had work stuff flare up, and I've been consistent for these like past several years just because I've had the ability to already have stuff like pre-published for a couple weeks, and that means if something shifts around, it's simple. I just like, okay, we're moving this up, we're moving this back a few weeks, and we're just pushing this back down until I get a chance to hit it again.
so with that in mind, is there a like too early to get you to a game? Like if I sent you a game and I was like, "Hey, it's gonna go on Kickstarter in 9 months."
It will probably go in a special zone of my like shelving reorganization that is like the uh I guess I'll probably get to this in like a few months because there's also a danger, right? So like, and this has happened before, right? You send me a game, it's gonna go on Kickstarter in 9 months. I play it, I write the review. You come back around, you're like, hey, so I was actually doing some play testing, and turns out the entire process for passing cards at the end of your turn is broken. And me with my review is like, well, I knew that, yeah. And they're like, so we changed it. So we would really like it if you could update your review to reflect that the game is now an entirely different game than the one that you played. And I'm like, well, now I just did a bunch of work for no reason. So I tend to back off a little bit until we're a little bit closer to the actual launch date, just to make sure that we're not making large scale playtesting changes that are going to affect what my review scores. Because it also, I mean, for both the publisher and the reviewer, there is nothing more frustrating than having a review that's fundamentally incorrect in some way, right? It refers to a mechanic that doesn't exist. It shows pictures of cards that are wrong. It includes a couple photos of gameplay scenarios that can't take place because you were playing and you forgot one of the rules, but you already taken the photos. Now it's too late to go back and do it. You kind of hope no one notices. Very specific example that definitely didn't happen to me. But yeah, so yeah, I tend to sit a little bit on it. I think that's why I like the 2 month thing is that usually the last month is a lot more like Kickstarter prep and marketing from what I've seen from like other publishers I've worked with, and so there's a lot less like really like cranking happening on the playtesting design side. Noting, of course, that many Kickstarter games change form significantly between my preview and the full version of it.
Do you ever look again at games that you previewed?
I think about it, and I have many of the games like accessible for whenever I decide to do that, and I might actually start doing that soon, because I just did it with Cat Rescue. So I did a preview of Cat Rescue. It came in a little sack. You like moved cats around to like rescue them and like get them to their forever homes. Very cute theme. I just got a copy of it from Chronicle Books, and it's very different. They have square cards, there's a playmat, like, and I ended up writing a review on it. I'm thinking there is something to that. The part of it is that it's a lot of timing around like fulfillment, around like making sure that you and is the game significantly different enough that a new review of it would actually be something that's useful. You know what I mean? Like, there's sort of that tension with like Fort and SBQF, right? I previewed SBQF, and it's since been picked up and converted into Fort. And in this case, I do think there are enough differences between Fort and SBQF to warrant another like revisiting of it. But beyond that, there's a certain amount of like finesse you have to do with content to make sure that you're in the same way that I think a game needs to be able to justify its own right to exist. I think content needs to be able to do the same thing at times. And I'm not going to necessarily say that all of my reviews are like, this definitely should have been written, this is a new and bold opinion, but rather that's something that I like to shoot for if I'm going to try and write something. Is I don't want to write something that I don't think is necessary in some way, even if it's not like the most interesting thing that anyone's ever read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think most of your content is great, and the other part of it I haven't read yet, so I have no opinions on.
Thank you.
So.
I'll be sure to try and publish some bad content just to even it out. Reviewing cups as a concept. Carry on.
It would be funny, at least.
To be fair, I'm actually pretty like pro cups as a concept, so it actually would be a pretty glowing review. Like things you can hold water in, great, love them.
David had a question. On your site, you mentioned how difficult it is to review RPG games. Do you know of any reviewers that specialize in reviewing tabletop RPGs?
So I'm not. This is a great sadness of mine because the TTRPG space, especially the like people of color working in the TTRPG space, well, women, by people of color, LGBTQIA folks working in the tabletop RPG space, I should clarify, have been doing some really kick-ass work there. So I would say investigate that space. You will find people who are doing more reviews there. I don't do it myself because I find it structurally hard to review an RPG, and I think it requires a different mindset than I usually take into a lot of my like more like board gaming reviews. Because, for instance, do we talk about like especially sprawling RPGs? So we're talking like Dungeons and Dragons, Overlight, a bunch of other systems that I definitely know, but I'm not going to name just in case I mess it up. There's something about thinking about the mechanics of those that, as someone who hasn't played a lot of RPGs, I don't think I would have a very meaningful opinion on, beyond just, it play fun. I am now Robot. Robot has feelings. Do I have feelings? We'll see. Which was my last D&D character. Yeah, I think that for this, there are some exceptions to this rule, obviously. So Icarus, the RPG that Renegade pushed up, when we were building a dice tower to spite God, because I mean, why else would you build an obnoxiously large tower? And inevitably, the thing that happens when you build a tower that's too large to spite God happens. Mild spoilers for the gameplay. That's, I think, a little bit different because it's self-contained and it takes about 2 hours to play. And so I think that like there's a difference between reviewing a game that has really only one gameplay pipeline outcome, which is you play it takes about 2 hours and you're done, against like I'm still in a different Dungeons and Dragons campaign that's on hiatus right now for obvious reasons, and we've been playing that for the better part of 2 years. Thinking about that from like how did this gameplay make me feel is more complicated because like my DM wrote me a web app and I have to use that to fight with my character because my character's a weird Yu-Gi-Oh ripoff. Like it's complicated. Again, the subject of an entirely different conversation. But I think that there are a lot of folks doing some really cool stuff in the RPG space, and there are folks like I know that there are like a bunch of folks doing a variety of different things, even on the board game side, that think a little bit more about the RPG space than say I have. But you know, like I think Chris Renshaw does a fair number of like RPG reviews and such.
Yeah. Like I think I'd have to know a lot about RPGs to even like give a good like whether something is good or bad, and to be able to separate the whole like did I make a good group?
Right,
like,
exactly.
I think it's the same kind of issue with legacy games where like people were like super into legacy games, and it's like, well, if you get yourself and 3 of your favorite people to play a game repeatedly, you're probably going to have a good time regardless of what the game is. So
not always for me, but that's an entirely different conversation. To be fair, that was my fault for getting a review copy of a very dry Euro legacy game and taking it to me, the obviously isn't the biggest fan of dry Euros, and my friend, who is also not the biggest fan of dry Euros. We played 19 games of that. Man. I mean, I thought it was fine. He doesn't talk about it. That's okay.
Yeah.
You win some, you lose some.
You have to like at least like the basics of it enough to get through
Yeah, I
that.
think there's a really interesting topic about legacy games and like people's relationship with legacy games that aren't based on an existing game, or was Pandemic Legacy just fire in a bottle? Yeah, again, the subject of a very lengthy ulterior discussion. But I'll probably know more once I play Machikoro Legacy.
Yeah, is that out, or like do you have a copy
I
of
mean,
it?
I have a copy. It's on my shelf. I just like keep meaning to get to it. The problem is, I told my coworkers that we would play it together, and then pandemic, so that hasn't happened.
Yeah.
And now I feel bad playing it with someone else.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was a joke when they announced it, but it wasn't, and we'll see if people like it.
Yeah, I mean, basically, like Pandemic Legacy Season 0 is coming.
Which, who knows what
Weird,
that will be.
weird time to announce it, but hey, whatever.
Well, like, is that why they went to season 0? Because, like, if they announced that they were doing a pandemic, like, a game about pandemics in a pandemic, that would be bad. But it's, like, before the pandemic, so it's fine,
Well, they did
right?
announce Hot Zone, which I think has become progressively less and less marketed given. But we don't have time to unpack all of that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway,
Anyway.
so you've read a lot of rules, like a lot of rules. Is there anything that you love to see in rules, or anything that you hate to see?
I think that this isn't me necessarily trying to go out of my way to clown on anybody. I think that there's definitely a feeling that I get when I suspect a publisher has not blind play tested a rule book, like, which is mostly that I cannot figure it out. I'm like, I've read somewhere around like probably 700 rule books. Like, I feel like at some level I should be able to figure out your game without like too much extra effort. And if I'm not 100% sure what's going on, even after a first game, I have some questions about how the rule book is laid out. I would say consistency is really good. So if a section of your rule book is talking about a goal a player would have, outline the goal. Like, tell us very explicitly. Assume that I have never played a board game in my entire life, and you are telling me for the first time what points are. Like, fine. If I'm like, okay, this is a very in-depth description of like what the goal is, I'm still like, but I think I mostly got the gist. I tend to like that. I tend to like round summaries quite a bit, just because that way I can keep track of the flow of the round. Setup and quick setup are both helpful. So like a lengthier setup bit. And every game needs a complete labeled photo of the components of the game. Like, point to each thing and tell me what it's called. Because if you're referring to the power chits and the energy chits, and they're not the same thing, well, that might be fine for a Manhattan Project. That may not be fine for Spirit Island. I don't necessarily know what you're talking about for X game. And especially when it's not necessarily intuitive. So something might call something a coin, but I got the Kickstarter version, which upgrades the money to metal coins. So now I'm like, wait a minute, the thing that's shaped like a coin, the circle is a cardboard thing, but that's being referred to as a coin. But I have metal tokens that aren't coins, and those metal tokens track energy. Now I'm confused. So I think really at the core of it, having a labeled diagram with all the components and what they're called is extremely helpful. Because a lot of publishers, to be totally fair to them, use I'm not going to say made up words because all words are made up, but they have a language that they use to describe their own components inside of the rulebook. And if you call something the mercy tracker, when really it's just like a tiny red cube that goes on a track that says mercy, that's fine. I just need to know what it is. Because if I see a bag of multicolored cubes and you say, yeah, one of them tracks this, one of them tracks this, one of them tracks this, and I don't know what they are, you're just going to get me picking cubes and putting them wherever I think they go, which is sometimes fine, but not always, especially if I'm doing photography.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like the photo of everything.
That's honestly what motivates my like setup section of my like game of my reviews is that I'm actually just taking photos of every component and labeling them for my own benefit. So that way, if I go back to this game later, I know what everything is.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. So the how to win in Robux, is that the first thing or the last thing?
I think what so at least this is me being biased because the way I write reviews and this is how I process games. I usually state what the overall goal of the game is. Like, your goal is to become like the new animal monarch by submitting offerings to various animal leaders and being rewarded for how much your offerings align with their goals, if that sounds familiar to you. That's probably the way I think about it, and then the nitty gritty of how points are assigned happens later in my brain for me because that way I'm at least primed. So I'm like, okay, I know what I should be listening for, which is things like offerings, things like animals, things like aligning with goals, and I know like where my brain wants to go with that, and then we can delve into like the more nitty gritty of gameplay. Note though, this is just necessarily how I think about games, not necessarily the way I think that rulebooks should be designed or written. I have zero rulebook expertise, and I will basically just say, yeah, there are other people you can pay to edit your rulebook, and if you're not sure, hit up one of them.
So, you brought up that you were part of the American Tabletop Awards, or
Yeah, that's a good time.
can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So, there's I think that so there are many different board game awards, right? And they all have their various ups, downs, pros, cons. Like that's fine. Part of the reason that we wanted to start our own was that there are a lot of games that, like, I feel like don't necessarily get, you know, a fair amount of attention for what I think they deserve, and also a lot of the awards, something that we've been trying to do with the American Tabletop Awards, don't necessarily translate that well into like me in the store trying to figure out what game I should buy for like my family or my friends, or if you don't know that much, a lot of them are inside baseball, right? Like if we're talking about a specifically American audience, the distinction between Kennerspiel and Kinderspiel, for instance, may matter a lot for, hobbyist gamers like us. It may not necessarily be as clear to a family about what game they should buy. And that's part of the reason they have like Children's Game of the Year on it, because then someone could say, oh, this is very clear to me, and thinking about the clarity of that. So rather than, so that was something that we wanted to try and appeal to. That's why we went with like 4 categories. So we wanted to have games that are good for people that are just getting into gaming, games that are good for like casual gameplay experiences, games that are more for like people who are looking for strategic gameplay time, and then games for people who are looking to really like dig in with a game that has a lot of like mental weight to it and see where they get. And so that's early gamers, casual games, strategy games, and complex games. We wanted to have something that was clear and straightforward, and we got a lot of good people together. I'm really, really excited about the people that we have on the committee, and they bring a variety of unique perspectives. I would love it if they all agreed with me every time, and that has not yet happened, but perhaps, maybe one day it will. This is me just sort of clenching my fist and yelling, "Ah, democracy!" from the back of the hallway.
So Charlie had a question. When you're reviewing a game, what other information do you like to get alongside the game?
Ah, yes, I remember this question in particular. So one thing I like is MSRP is usually helpful. So for a variety of reasons, I do not deal a lot with game price relative to what the perceived value of the game is. I think, especially as someone that got the game for free, that is a very complex swamp that I do not want to wade into. So I usually just present the price as a statement of, if you are looking to buy the game, this is roughly how much it costs. Keeping that in mind while you read the review, and please arrive at your own value judgment. I am not going to make one for you. That is a personal choice, and I prefer it that way. That's not necessarily what everyone does, right? So it's perfectly fine if someone wants to say, I paid $80 for this game, and I personally do not feel like it was worth $80 to me. That's fine. I just feel complicated about the idea of a publisher sent this to me for free, but I don't think that I would have paid $50 for the thing that I'm currently holding, even though I got it for free, And it feels a little bit shakier for me from say like, do I feel convinced by that statement? Not terribly. But other things that are helpful for like Kickstarters. So a link to the Kickstarter, always useful. Launch date, always useful. It may be helpful to just explain how long the campaign is if you already know, because if I have extra content, especially for like Instagram photos for the game, being able to know when the game is going to go off Kickstarter helps a fair bit. Or even just a reminder email. It's like, hey, there are 2 days left in this Kickstarter. Like, if you've got any more content that you have for this, like, now's the time, buddy. What else do I want to know for everybody about? Most of the stuff I can look up because publishers have already, well, rather, if you have not made a BGG page for your game, please do so, because there are just basic facts available on that page that are very helpful to people, like player count, rough playtime. I will say that I find playtime to be a bit of a fake number. Like, I usually will just kind of keep track of my sessions and then do a quick average of what those sessions are. If I do not have it, then I will usually just defer to what the publisher says. But for instance, I have seen games that say they will take anywhere between 30 and 90 minutes, to which I'm like, I don't know how to budget for that. Like, do I tell my friends, well, it could take 30 minutes, it could take an hour and a half, and there's really no way to tell. Like, those are very different game flows, even for a casual game. So I think I would appreciate from the publisher side if you can get the tightest possible bound on what your playtime is. If you want to be really picky and you're just like, looking to do stuff for fun, if you want to include setup time, like, I would like that. I think there are people who are amenable to the idea of including setup time as another factor of playtime, because I've definitely played a 30-minute game that has taken 30 minutes to set up, and I've been like, I feel like a little bit of my time was mismanaged here. But that's a little more of a complicated thing. Beyond that, I do my own photography, so I don't really need a media kit or press releases or anything like that. That is not true for everybody. So I'd say always include the media kit and let the content creator decide what they want to do with it. It usually helps to have at least a couple photos of the box, some render of the box, a couple shots of the game being played, and etc. If you do not have those photos readily available, you can always pay someone to do the photography for you. Just throwing that out there.
Is that somebody you? Could people
I mean,
pay you?
It can be. I charge. Yes, I also enjoy getting paid in exchange for goods and/or services. It's a real hobby of mine. See, that's where you use the shoulders. Just bringing it back.
So it's getting down to 3 o'clock. If people want to hear more from you, where should they go?
So I'm usually just screaming into the void on Twitter, which is what I'll probably return to after this. So you can find me there at What's E Playing, due to a minor snafu where What's Eric Playing is 16 characters and Twitter's max is 15.
Oh,
Take that, me. As far as web content, I'm usually available at what'sericplaying.com, and I'm on Instagram at instagram.com/what'sericplaying. If you really, truly want to interact on Facebook, there are some people who do it. I have people. Yeah, I'm on Facebook. Facebook.com/what'sericplaying is also a place where you can find content. But yeah, beyond that, and also for like American Tabletop Awards stuff, that would just be americantabletop.awards.com or the @us on Twitter.
Well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you
Absolutely.
all for listening.
Thanks for having me.
If anyone wants to join the Discord and talk more after, it's at weirddraftgames.com/Discord. But we do this every Sunday at 2 p.m. So not everyone is as amazing as Eric, but they're usually pretty nice.
Bless. I appreciate it.
So have a great weekend, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.